Hi, it's Mishele with the Clumsy Crafter. Today, we're going to put together a beautiful necklace, and I'm going to talk to you about the family dynamic of addiction and some things that you can do to stop that pattern from repeating itself in your family moving forward. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so I wanted to show you these pendants I got from Brittany Chavers at turquoisestreetbeads.com. Now, I'm not a sponsor of theirs or anything. My channel's too new to have any sponsors, but I bought some stuff from her and she sends it in this beautiful pouch. Look at this. Isn't that pretty? And it comes in these little foils like this. So this is the one we're going to work with today. Isn't that beautiful? And she got it in Tucson, and she picks out the most beautiful stuff. But this is the one we're going to work with today. And this is the beads that I've chosen to work with. There's some squares in rose quartz and some rounds. And then I'm using also these beads I got from Sam's Bead Shop. I just love shopping at his shop. And it says bicone, pink golden luster, check glass, custom made for his shop. And they're bicones that look like this. And they're going to go in between here. And I'm also going to hang some as dangles from here. So that's going to be beautiful. But this is the other stuff I bought from Brittany. She also does some of her own polymer clay pendants. And they're really beautiful. But this is the other things. This is turquoise. And isn't that beautiful? And then I got this other one right here. But this is the one we're going to work with today. And then later I'll show you some other stuff that I got from Sam's Bead Shop. But this is the pattern I've chosen to do. And what she talked about was these bales are big enough that you can make a pretty necklace that's beautiful on its own and then slide it through that bale and wear it with or without. So I could wear it with a chain, or I could wear it with this necklace that we're making today, or I could wear the necklace alone. And so that's the premise that I'm thinking on today. So as I'm stringing this up, I'm going to string it the rest of the way and make it quite long. I'm going to talk to you about the family dynamic of addiction. And there is a family dynamic that's been identified as being present in addiction. And when I worked for Cirque Lodge years ago, the thing that I did at times was to do presentations to families as they came to be part of the treatment for their person that was in Cirque Lodge. I would give the presentation that helped them to understand what dynamic is present in a lot of families where addiction occurs, because there is a family dynamic that we see in most families where addiction occurs. And that is that there's a controlling person at the head of the family, usually a parent. And that person is controlling enough that the personalities of the children can't develop in individual ways. So in other words, it's so controlling that the individualness of the children can't form properly. And so what happens is they don't have a sense of self because the parent is so controlling. And when they don't have a sense of self, when that child becomes a teenager, and what happens in the brain is the brain becomes an abstract thinker. In other words, when a child becomes a teenager, they begin to understand that the world is much bigger. And so the world kind of looks much bigger, and they begin to understand that adults pretty much don't do anything without some sort of reward. Adults won't go to work if they don't get paid, that we pretty much are reward driven in that way. And they begin to understand that. And because of that, they have a lot of insecurities, of course, because the world is very big. And if they didn't have a proper sense of themselves as a child, then they start to practice escapism. So they start to escape from reality because reality is too scary, essentially. And so they often do that with drugs and alcohol. And they'll start that sometimes at a very early age, depending on when they start through puberty. And, and that isn't always the case, but often it's the case. And so as I talk with these parents, I ask them to look inside themselves and ask themselves, are you the controlling person that didn't allow this child to develop a proper sense of themselves? Because maybe they wanted to be a musician and that wasn't okay with you. You wanted them to go to medical school or law school. Maybe they were, that kind of thing. So maybe they were a highly creative child, but that wasn't okay with you. And so they weren't allowed to pursue creative pursuits. And that it has a detrimental effect on a child who is creative, but doesn't have any affinity for doing the kinds of things that maybe you insisted that they do. And so because of that, they practice this escapism because they have such a horrible sense of self. And so that is the family dynamic of addiction. And so the way to counteract that as a parent is to make sure that you allow your children to feel. So the kind of phrases that don't work that make a dysfunctional family are those phrases like, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. Things like, our family doesn't act that way. Where this sense of family becomes more important than the sense of individuality. And just things like that. And so instead, where when a child is crying or upset, what you do is take them in your arms and let them cry it out. Let them cry until they're done crying. And just let them cry things out, and they'll learn to manage their own emotions or to understand their own emotions, and especially to have their own emotions. This is what we call emotional intelligence. And if they're able to be allowed to have their own emotions. Oh, I messed that up. I forgot this. Yeah, if they're able to be allowed to have their own emotions and things like that, then they'll be able to learn to manage their own emotions and understand themselves and have a sense of self. And so that's really kind of an important thing. You guys were probably all yelling at me, saying, you forgot something. Yeah, so that's how we counteract addiction in families, is by teaching whatever controlling parent to deal with their own problems that happened when they were young, because they were probably raised in that kind of environment or a neglectful environment where their own emotions weren't acknowledged. And so when they come in, and I hear all this as a trauma therapist as I'm dealing with people's trauma. And so something to also kind of be aware of is that a lot of what's coming out in trauma therapy among young people, because I don't really counsel with children, but I counsel with people 18 and older. So I get people, sometimes I'll do a little bit younger than 18, sometimes as young as 16 or 17. But what's coming out in their trauma therapy is this deep resentment that they feel like they weren't valued. And it's interesting that what's happening now in our country is that the playgrounds are being replaced by dog parks, and people are taking more time and energy in preparing to have an animal in their family than they are in preparing to have a child. For instance, it became socially acceptable because movie stars were doing it to meet somebody, move in with them right away, and then get pregnant. And so this commitment that is essentially a lifelong commitment, there was very little thought being put into this lifelong commitment of raising a child, paying for a child, and providing stability for a child. And people are just moving in with someone, or meeting somebody, moving in with them, and getting pregnant. And that is absolute disaster for creating a human being that feels cared about, loved, planned for, and stable. And so that's not really conducive to emotional health and emotional safety. And so what's happening is that people are coming in for trauma therapy as young adults, and they're angry and confused, and they have a lot of trauma. And we see that anger coming out in teenagers that are acting out in these dangerous ways. And oftentimes, there's not a whole lot of thought. People will walk their dogs twice a day, but not take their children out for a walk twice a day. And so it's kind of important to understand and recognize that as a society, we've stopped valuing children, and we're valuing animals more than we're valuing children. And it's really kind of sad. And we really need to do something as a society to change that, so that our children are valued, or we're not going to have, we're just not going to have a very good society. Look, I did it here too. I'm going to have to undo that side. Oh my goodness. I did it right there too. Okay, well, then we undo it. Anyway, so that's the family dynamic of addiction. And that's the ways that it's going to be really important for you to not take that forward another generation, and let addiction come into play in another generation, is to really value whatever personality differences a child has that makes them into who they are, because that's what's going to allow them to become who they're supposed to become. That makes sense, doesn't it? So, and one other thing I wanted to caution you guys about, that last year I had an experience with, was a client of mine contacted me, and she and her mother years ago had been clients of mine, and she told me that her mother had passed away. Now, her mother was just in her 40s, in her late 40s, and I asked her, how did that happen? And she said that she had been following some woman on the internet who had labeled herself a diet guru. And this woman didn't have any training whatsoever in nutrition. And this woman had a diet that she started out with, a cleanse, where she would have people drink a drink that they put together with a certain amount of salt water in that drink. And her mother was doing this cleanse. And because it had a high concentration of salt water in it, her mother died. Now, we all know you can't drink salt water. And somehow this woman had at least convinced my client that this cleansing drink she was putting together was somehow good for her. Now, we're in an age that I feel like is somewhat like the Dark Ages, where nobody's monitoring the internet to see if what's being said is true, or if what's being done on the internet is even good for you. There was a time when I was really young, because I'm kind of old, and so television was new when I was young, and there would be commercials that would come on, and I would run and tell my mom, "Hey Mom, this commercial says this or this," and she would say, "Sweetheart, that's not true." And I would be just shocked that there would be something that would be on the TV that was not true. But back then, people could put anything on TV that they wanted, and they could say anything. And then they started passing these rules in Congress, the Truth in Advertising Act, and truth in, news couldn't put anything on the news that wasn't true. They had to print retractions if they put news that wasn't true out there. And with the advent of the internet and of the last few years, people can say anything. They can say anything, and it doesn't have to be true. And it it isn't fact checked. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. And everything had to be fact checked. Like the American people couldn't be misled without getting in trouble. And that's how things used to be when I was growing up. And that's not how things are anymore. And it's a little bit scary. It really is a lot like the Dark Ages were, where the information, nobody knew whether it was true or not. And here's kind of where we're at in the age that we're at right now, that nobody really knows if what you're being told on the internet is true. And it's kind of scary, especially in light of my client having actually died from following someone who, and I wish I knew who this was, because my client didn't know who it was. She just knew that her mom was following some diet person, and she didn't know who it was. Her mom had just told her about it and then told her what she was doing for this diet, and then ended up dying. And so I just want to caution you about stuff like that, anybody on the internet can call themselves a life coach, having had absolutely no training in coaching. There is a life coaching association that you can check to see if someone's had a life coaching certification. You can check these kind of things, and you can check to see if your news is true by examining things further. I mean, just things like that. I just think it's really important, considering what happened, to my client and the age that we're in. And it's just so, it's actually kind of scary after having heard that situation. Okay, so I'm going to finish this and then show you the finished piece at the end. And I think you're really going to like it. It's going to have this as the pendant. But in the meantime, I wanted to show you some stuff that I got. I got a haul from Sam's Bead Shop, and I won a prize. His sales are so fun because you can win prizes. So I won this prize. See, it says Mishele Walker, checkout winner. Czech spelled like Czech Republic. Congrats. And Jesse is his tech support guy. And this isn't that beautiful? Oh my gosh, it's so pretty. I'm excited. It's a pendant. So that's what I won for being the checkout winner. And I got, this is a carved rose made of shell. Isn't that pretty? I got 2 of them. And then I got the earrings too. Where are they? Here they are. And I got the smaller ones that are the earrings as well. Ooh, aren't those beautiful? So excited. I'm going to put together a pendant and earrings. And those are made of shell. And I'm just getting some things from him that I don't have, because I have so much in my own stash. But he came back from Tucson and has some things I don't have. And this one says amethyst freeform faceted kite. Oh, look at that. I love amethyst. One of my very favorite stones. But look at that. Isn't that beautiful? And that's a freeform faceted kite. Oh my gosh, it's so pretty. This is some pearls, and these are colored in copper. And these are dyed a copper color. And they're real pearls, freshwater pearls, but they're dyed a copper color. And those would be really beautiful with a turquoise piece, wouldn't they? The next thing I have here is some pearls, and these are rectangle pearls. They're doing pearls now, these cultured pearls in different shapes. And this one's a rectangle. And Brittany Chavers with Turquoise Street made the cutest crabs out of polymer clay, and I put one of these in the crab's arm as a purse. It looked like a purse, and I made earrings for my granddaughter. My granddaughter Sammy, I'll have to have Sammy come on the channel at some point. She's so full of life. And these are kite-shaped black lip shells. Look at those. Oh my gosh, look at that shine. They're so beautiful. This is Sam's bead shop right here. Those, I have this beautiful bead I've been trying to figure out what to do with. This beautiful, also got from Sam's bead shop. It's crystal quartz. Crystal quartz just means it has lead inside the glass. And wouldn't that be just great as a focal with this? This would just be the focal, and that would be all the way up the sides. That's what I'm going to do with that. That'll be beautiful. And then here is, let's see what this is. This is, oh, that's the pearl. This is buttons. He gets these really unique buttons from Tucson. And that's a button. These make really great clasps for bracelets. Look at that thing. Oh my gosh, it's so pretty. And here's some more pearls in a shape I don't have. Kind of a teardrop shape. They've been making these great shapes I mentioned. They call it mini baroque. Look at that. Look at that. Oh my gosh, it's so pretty. And here's another button. Let's see what this one looks like. Ooh, a copper. Look at the leaves on that. Oh, wow. What is that? There's something on there. Poppy flowers. Look at that. Ooh. That'd be great with turquoise as well. Copper and turquoise. And this one, oh, Botswana agate, my very favorite stone. Look at that. Look at the stripes in there. Oh my gosh. Love Botswana agate. What do we got here? This is my second favorite. This is labradorite. Look how shiny this thing is. Look at the flash. Oh my gosh. Labradorite drops. These go really good in earrings, like at the bottom of earrings. So I'm going to make some earrings with that. Maybe I'll show it to you. What else have we got here from Sam's Bead Shop? We got 3 more things. Here is some stick pearls. They say grade B. And they're just some colored pearls. I love those. Really pretty. Oh, here's a pendant that I've never seen before, a carved shell. Look at that. Look at that. Bubbles on there. Oh my gosh. That is so cool. Let's see. What else have we got here? Here's an abalone oval. I haven't ever seen this before. Look at that. I think I got 2 of them because I wanted to try and make earrings. So I do have 2. Another one over there too. Look at that. That's so pretty. And then I got also an abalone pear. So I could make earrings out of this too. Look at that. Whoa. Whoa. Look at that abalone. And then, oh, here's one more. It's a donut. It's a rhodonite. Look at that. Whoa. Anyway, that's my haul from Sam's Bead Shop. So I'll come back when I have this finished and I'll show you the finished product. Hi everyone, just kind of as a bonus on this video, I wanted to show you what the necklace looks like on when it's completely finished. And also, since I did talk about relationships a bit in this video, I want to just remind you about relationship timelines. What I mean by that is that relationships do have timelines. So when we first meet someone, the brain bonds and all we can see is their good side. And that goes on for about 5 to 6 months. And people will sometimes rush a relationship. So they too quickly get financially involved. They move in together. They even sometimes get pregnant and have a baby. I talked a little bit about that. And unfortunately, what happens is after about that 5 to 6 month timeline, since we are all human beings and we're a collection of strengths and weaknesses, that a person's weaknesses will start to show up after that. And that's normal. And at that time, any red flags that have been ignored will really start to come front and center. And many people will need to have the courage to break up at that point. And that's when relationships will start to the cracks will start to show. And people will need to have skills at that point to be able to talk through the weaknesses that show up in the relationship. And it takes about another 6 months or even more for people to learn to talk through the parts of the relationship that are not going to work, because Dr. Gottman found in his research that 69% of your issues are unresolvable, 69%. And that leaves only about 31% of your issues that are resolvable. And so that 31% compatibility is what people would want to learn to build a relationship around, is that 31% compatibility. And this takes a lot of work. And if you're living in the same house, or you're too financially involved, or that kind of thing, it explodes a relationship, and it'll explode it almost every time. And so I just encourage you to not get financially entangled, not live with someone, not have a baby with someone for at least a year, and until you've decided whether you can live with this person long term. And that takes a lot of time to let a relationship gel, to really let it have that 1 year timeline. And that's what people are not doing at this day and age. And it all started with this thing that celebrities were doing in the last decade, where they got involved with somebody, moved in and had a baby right away. And then everybody started doing it. And I promise you that's created, chaos and havoc. And I'm just going to tell you what works with the brain, with psychology, and encourage you to do what works with just what works. And so I just wanted to remind you of what works in relationship timelines, since we did talk a bit about relationships in this video. And here's the necklace and what it looks like on. Okay? Talk to you later. Bye-bye.